Welcome to the Dough Roller Money Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Berger. Today, in episode 333, man, it's unbelievable. We're almost to a full year of podcasts. 365, right? Yeah, something like that. Episode 333, I'm answering your questions. As I mentioned in the last show, I'm way behind. They're stacked up. I'm sorry about that, but I am reading them. I'm getting through them, and I got 5 I'm going to answer today. I'm actually thinking about bringing on a certified financial planner that I know who's never been on the show before, and having he and I answer some of your questions together. Why not get a CFP on board? And if you're watching by video, yes, this is an Ohio State Buckeye cap that I'm wearing. At least as I record this, we're number 1 in the country. We just trounced Maryland. So if you're a Maryland fan, I feel for you. But hey, you got basketball. You got that going for you. All right. Enough of that. So we got all kinds of topics to cover today in the Q&A. As I said, I've got 5 of them. I tried to pick, questions that sort of have a wide variety of topics. So let's get to it. The first one is from Jennifer. Actually, I have 3 from women today. 3 out of 60% of the questions are from women, I think. Well, yeah, that's unbelievable. I think that's a first. Anyway, first one's from Jennifer. She says, first, I have to say your podcast has been so much fun. Your information is inspiring. I'm 48. I've pretty much wasted all of the money we have earned up until now. To be frank, we are screwed. I'm sorry to laugh. It's just... I shouldn't laugh. Should I hit pause and re-record? She's just so blunt about it. So I'm trying to turn it all around. We have some credit cards that were turned over to collections. When they got turned over, the companies offer you a payoff. Would you recommend taking that lower payoff or paying the full balance? We are hoping to raise our credit score so we can buy a home and stop wasting $3,000 a month on rent. Thank you so much for everything you do. Very much appreciated. Well, Jennifer, thank you for the email. Thank you for the question. And as you know, I'm never going to tell you what you should do because, for starters, I don't know everything about your circumstances, but I can at least kind of walk through how I would think about it and some things to think about, right? The first thing that jumps out at me is that you're paying $3,000 a month in rent. Now, I know that's not really what you asked me about. And I don't know where you live. Maybe you live in New York City and rent there is expensive. But I would just say you don't need to buy a home to stop paying $3,000 a month in rent, right? You could rent a less expensive place. Again, don't know the circumstances. Maybe that's not a possibility. I don't know. That's my first reaction to your email. To your question, I think there are 2 ways to think about this, at least 2 ways that I think about it. The first has nothing to do with legal issues. If they've offered you, let's just say you owe, just to make up a number, 10 grand, and they've said, hey, pay us 7 grand and we'll write the rest of it off. You can certainly take that deal legally. There is I'll say moral issue. I know half of you now are rolling your eyes. That's okay. There's part of me that just believes we should pay our debts. Now, it's one thing if, you have overwhelming debt and you end up filing for bankruptcy and you just can't pay it. There's just no way to do it. But if you're able to pay your debts, I think you should. Now, I'm not making a judgment in the sense that if some of you who are listening took a debt settlement, we talked about debt consolidation versus debt settlement in the last show. Some of you may have taken a payoff, right? You may have settled debt for less than you owed, and it was what you needed to do at the time. And I make zero judgment about that at all. And in fact, when I was growing up, I lived through basically a bankruptcy with my my stepfather's business. So I was younger, of course, teenager, but I kind of see what that does and how difficult it is on a family. So I get you. I've lived through it. But if you're able to pay your debts, I think you should. Again, it's just I guess it's a moral perspective. I don't know. And by the way, as I record this, I realize that I got the number completely wrong at the start of this show. It's 324. At least I think I got it wrong. 324. Anyway, now back to your question. Well, if you take a settlement where you pay less than you owe, that will get reflected on your your credit report, and it will absolutely hurt your credit score, lower it. How much? I don't know. I do believe, in my opinion, my best guess is it would be significant. Now, how would you figure this out on your own? Well, I would start with the Google machine, right? Does a debt settlement affect credit? And then I would look for what I consider to be very reputable websites. And for me, in the case of credit scores, I either want FICO, right? Because that's the company behind the formula, or one of the credit bureaus, or maybe a government site. So, by the way, it's not to say that other sites, including the Dough Roller, have excellent information, but particularly when you're talking about a very technical, I think this is technical, credit scoring issue. Same would be true with a very technical sort of retirement account issue, where you might want a government source, namely the IRS, or that kind of thing. I'm really looking for specific types of sites, and so I find Experian has an article, and you go to it, and they have the latest article. Will settling a debt affect my credit score? Now, I probably should have read this before I gave my answer, but my answer was yes, it'll lower your score, but I don't know by how much. What's Experian say? And they say, yeah, it will be a negative. It won't be as bad as not paying it at all, of course. They point that out, and that makes sense. But it will hurt your score. And again, the question is how much. The problem with giving an answer to that question is it depends on all kinds of factors. And there's many things that affect your credit score. How long you've had credit, your credit utilization, late payments, and all this sort of thing. So it's difficult to give you an answer to that, but it's definitely going to hurt your score, which then in turn will affect your mortgage. It could prevent you from qualifying for a mortgage for a while, depends. Or even if you qualify, it could cause the interest rate that you would get to be higher than it otherwise would be. Again, very difficult to know the actual impact because so many circumstances influence it. So there you go. I think paying off a debt or settling it, I think there is just again, I'll call it a moral issue. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it, but I think it's something to consider, right? And then if you do decide to pay it all, to take a payoff or a settlement, it will hurt your credit score. I can't tell you how much. And then thirdly, even apart from buying a new home, you might be able to rent somewhere else for less than $3,000 potentially. Again, don't know where you live, just a thought. And I think it's great that you're listening to this podcast. Hopefully you're listening to others, reading books, and asking these questions, because it shows that you really do want to turn things around, and asking these kinds of questions and learning and trying to figure it all out is just part of the process. So thank you for the email.
All opinions are that of the DR podcast, and we do receive compensation from Chase for this advertisement. First, a shout out to our sponsor, the Chase Sapphire Preferred Card. Finding the right credit card for your spending habits is key to strong financial health, and the Chase Sapphire Preferred Card is one of the best travel reward credit cards available today. New cardholders can receive a terrific intro offer, and Chase Ultimate Reward points are earned on every purchase. To apply or learn more, visit creditcards.com/doughroller.
All right, next one comes from Robin. I'm going to assume Robin is a female, and that way I got my 60%. But I guess that's not necessarily true. Wait, it is. Here's what she says. I don't hear a lot of women asking questions on your Q&A shows. Yeah, I already knew that was coming. And I do have a few questions, which inspired me to chime in with questions and also to tell you how much you've helped me. I've listened to your podcasts for a couple of years now. I've tried other podcasts about finance off and on, but found them either extremely basic or way over my head. Thank you for producing a really informative podcast that covers a wide variety of complex topics in a way that lay people can understand. I like to think of your podcast as like getting a free personal trainer for your finances. I like that. As it keeps me on track and motivates me to handle my finances better. And it's free. I like to say it's free and worth every penny. All right. Robin continues, I've made some pretty big life changes in the past couple of years after listening to your podcasts and thinking more about where my money goes and what are my priorities and goals. Specifically, I moved out of a $550,000 condo and am renting it for almost the amount of my mortgage and condo fee. I've moved into a $225,000 condo. My monthly mortgage and condo payments went from over $3,300 to just over $1,500. I looked at townhouses for around $400,000 because I love having a backyard garden, but felt I needed to save more, so I opted for the condo and am joining the community garden just down the road. I've made similar life changes like eating out only once or twice per month and just really reeling in my spending generally. I thought these sacrifices would be difficult, but I'm on a roll and so excited about the savings that I'm as happy as I've ever been. Let me just stop there. I mean, this is really a big part of the book I wrote. So often we look at these changes in our lives and we think it's going to be miserable. We're going to move from a big condo worth $550 to a smaller one, let's say for $225, and we could move into a $400,000 townhouse with a backyard, but no, we're going to stick to a $225,000 condo. We're going to join a garden, a community garden instead of having our own. We're going to eat out less, and we're just going to be miserable. And here Robin is. She's made these changes, and you know what? They're not as bad as she may have thought they were going to be, right? And as she says, she's as happy as she's ever been. And I found that to be true. I think we, in our minds, we overplay how painful certain things are going to be. They say in chess, the threat is greater than the execution, meaning I may threaten to put someone in check, let's say, and they have to deal with that threat, right? They can't just ignore it. And that often causes more stress in a player than if I just move the piece and put them in check. And then they deal with it. Okay, I got to deal with it now. It's kind of like if you ever get nervous, you're going to give a presentation at work or whatever. You're real nervous up until it's time for the presentation. Then once it gets going, and you're hopefully things go well. Once it gets going, all that the nervousness just sort of falls away. And I think we do the same thing with changes in our lives about money, right? I mean, I've gone without a car now. It's been 3 or 4 months. Let's see, July, 3 months. I still, as I've said, I'm probably going to get another car at some point. But, before I did that, there was some thoughts like, well, this is going to be, I like the idea of not having a car payment, or even if I pay cash, not dealing with maintenance and insurance, but not having a car, that's going to be really inconvenient. And then once you live it, you're like, yeah, no, not really. Every now and again I do an Uber, but no, it's not that bad. And anyway, I think it's a great point that Robin makes in her email. And I think it's something to keep in mind. All right, back to her email. I will be maxing out my 401k for the first time this year and making catch-up contributions. She says she's 50 years old. I have 3 rental properties and one is nearly paid off. I've saved enough to pay for my kids' college. Looking at my cash, investments, and home equity, I'm shocked to see that these total, and she gave me the amount. I don't know. I won't mention it, but it's a good number. This really inspires me to save even more. Here are my questions. Number 1, I've heard a couple of people mention that someday soon tax rates will go up, given the recent tax cuts and the deficit. Any thoughts on that? I'm trying to decide whether to switch some of my 401k contributions to a Roth 401k. She says she's in the 24% tax bracket, and she gives a little more detail, but that gives you the gist of her question. So, boy, do I think taxes are going to go up. Well, I guess it depends on who gets elected, I guess is one way. There's a struggle. First of all, let me give you my view on whether taxes are going to go up. And then I'm going to give you my view on what we ought to do given the uncertainty. There is we live in interesting times in this country as it relates to economic issues, because on the one hand, it's hard to imagine a better time economically. Employment is at a 50-year low. Even labor participation rates are getting a little better, even as more and more people retire. Interest rates are historically low. Stock market is doing extremely well. And yet at the same time, there are politicians and I'm not making a political statement here, just I think a fact, on the left, who are saying, things really aren't as good as they seem. And a lot of people are struggling. And that message resonates with a large segment of our population. A lot of people say you're right. So you think about that. Robust employment, robust labor participation, low rates, and yet there's still this feeling that something's not right. Now, not everyone shares that feeling, but a lot of people do. And I think that puts us in a fairly interesting time. It's like a Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. So we're living in interesting times. I think something has to give, right? You have sort of two competing interests, if you will. You have the debt on the one hand, which we've kind of gotten off easy with low interest rates. I mean, the reality is if the interest rates on our debt went back to what we might call an historic norm, our annual spending would just would increase significantly just in interest payments. So we have this debt hanging over our heads, and it's of course growing. I think this year it's growing by $1 trillion. Doesn't matter why for purposes of our conversation. It does matter. It's obviously an important issue, but for our purposes, whatever the reason is, obviously the tax cuts had a big part of it, and increasing entitlement spending is a big part of it. $1 trillion added to it. That's gonna leave a mark. Eventually, the low interest rates and the growing economy has allowed us to kick the can down the road, and that's what we've done. I think in some ways, I think everyone's responsible for it. I don't even think that's a Republican versus Democrat issue. It's just that the two parties approach it differently. But at the end of the day, our politicians and us as voters are responsible for this, right? So you've got that issue. And then you have this growing chorus of those who want to increase spending significantly, right? Whether it's Medicare for all, that's a big topic now. Paying for college education or paying off college debt, that's a big topic now. Now, some of that's going to get financed, at least based on the plans, through taxing just certain individuals, mainly rich people, however you define that, billionaires and whatnot. Of course, that's still money pulled out of the economy that could go to deficit reduction or debt reduction, but might, depending on who gets elected and who controls the House and Senate, could go to more entitlement spending, right? And so all of that is to say, I don't see how taxes don't go up. No matter who wins, how that plays out, whether we have Medicare for all or we don't, whether we pay for college education or pay off school loans or we don't, given the debt, given even with existing entitlements, the spending trajectory that we have, because they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as a percentage of the government's budget, I don't see how we don't raise taxes. What form that will take, I have no idea. I don't see how we don't raise taxes. When it will happen, no idea. How much? No clue. Will it affect specifically you or me? No idea. Although I will add one last thing before I give you sort of some practical tips. And that is, it will absolutely impact the middle class. This idea that we're just going to tax the billionaires, that's just pie in the sky in my view. And that's true whether we implement new entitlement programs like Medicare for all or not. I think this idea that don't worry, middle class, we're not going to tax you anymore. The problem is the numbers just don't work out. The math just doesn't work. So I fall, my income today falls in the middle class bucket, right? I'm not worried about the billionaire taxes. I don't have to worry about that, or even the rich taxes. In terms of my income, my wife and I's income, we're squarely. I think we're just like Robin. I think we'll be in the 24% tax bracket this year, and I fully expect that my taxes at some point will go up. I just don't see how we either fund new entitlement programs and or deal with the debt and deficit without raising taxes on the middle class. That's my view. Now remember, I thought interest rates would start to go up in 2010, so I'm not very good at this prediction game. So because I'm not very good at it, the way I think about it is I just like you do asset allocation, you don't know, are U.S. stocks going to do better than foreign? I don't know. I'll invest in both. Well, how about small cap value versus emerging markets? I don't know. I'm going to invest in both, right? I do the same thing with taxes. And so while most of our retirement accounts are in traditional retirement plans, and that's because I used to be in a higher tax bracket, I wanted that tax deduction. Now that we're in the lower brackets, we've got some Roth conversions that we did, my wife and I both, and our current 401, my current 401k contributions are all going into a Roth 401k. I think it makes sense at the 24% tax bracket, and I'm trying to get a little more diversity, tax diversity, in my retirement accounts. So, will that pan out? Will that prove to have been a smart move? If I'm still recording this podcast in 25 years and you're still listening, I'll let you know. But I don't think it's going to hurt me. I don't think I'm going to look back and, boy, with profound regret that I didn't, keep it all in traditional 401ks, for example. So I don't know how helpful any of this is to any of you or to you, Robin, but that's my approach. Do I think taxes are going to go up? Yes, including, notwithstanding promises being made on the middle class. But at the same time, I don't know when, I don't know how much, I don't know exactly how it'll affect me, so I'm trying to cover all my bases. All right, question number 2 for Robin. What's the best way to go about finding a financial advisor? Any red flags to look for? Are there any websites or organizations that provide particularly detailed reviews or honest recommendations, not motivated by referral fees? Well, honestly, I like Mark Zorel, right? Rick Ferry also, who's been on the podcast as an author, and I like Rick. The thing I like about both of them is that they're not, although I think Mark may, if you want him to, I'm not positive about this, but they're fee only. So here's the thing. When you hear someone say I'm fee only, that can mean 2 different things. In the case of Rick and Mark, what that means is they charge an hourly, or Mark's just won, $96 a year. And that's the fee. They're not managing your investments. He'll come up with a portfolio for you. He'll help you come up with an asset allocation that you then go implement. Why pay someone 1% of your wealth every year to stick your money in 3 or 4 or 5 mutual funds? That's just crazy, right? So they'll work with you. They'll look at your current asset allocation. They'll look at how you should take Social Security. They'll look at whether you should annuitize some of your retirement. They'll look at whether you should do some Roth convert. They'll do all those things, but they're just doing it for flat fees. I don't know what Rick's fee is, but and I use Mark Zorel. As full disclosure, I use Mark Zorel. I have no financial relationship with either of them in terms of promoting them, none. So those are the 2 that I like, and I like that model. Normally, when someone says they're a fee only, that means they're going to charge you a fee to manage your investments. 1% is standard, and they'll say, "Look, I'm a fiduciary. I'm a fee only, so you can trust me." The problem with it is the cost is just too much. It's just crazy to spend 1%. So now the other thing is, if you're at Vanguard, and other mutual funds may offer this, Fidelity, I don't know, but you can meet with a CFP. So you could talk to folks at Vanguard, for example, and that would be another source. So beyond that, I'm not aware of, I know there are websites that sort of review advisors, but none that I know well enough to recommend. If you would like that kind of website, Robin, I recommend you join the Facebook group, doorroller.net/Facebook group, and ask your question in the Facebook group. I guarantee you'll get some great answers. Okay. 3rd question comes from Dan the Man. We've heard from Dan in the past. He says, "Hi, Rob. I listened to your latest episode on fire math and the Financial Freedom Calculator." And let me stop there. If you just Google Financial Freedom Calculator, you'll see it. It comes up. It's a Door Roller article, and it links to a Google spreadsheet, and you can use the calculator. He says, "One question I've always had about this is how should one factor in pre versus post-tax funds? Financial freedom is defined as 25 times our annual spending. My assumption has always been that is pre-tax. And I think," he's putting that in quotes, "your calculator assumes the same." Let me just stop there. The calculator actually doesn't. The calculator doesn't really make an assumption at all about taxes. It's raw numbers, right? And I'll come back to that in a minute. He says, "As you know, $1 million in a 401k can be much different than $1 million in a Roth. Obviously, this difference will vary based on your tax rate at the time of financial independence." Let me stop there just to make sure we're all on the same page. In a traditional 401k or IRA, when you take the money out in retirement, you got to pay taxes on it it's treated as ordinary income. If it's in a Roth and you're in retirement and it's a qualified distribution, you don't pay any taxes, right? So $1 million in a traditional 401k, depending on how quickly you take it out, might only be worth, let's just say, 2/3 of that amount. In a Roth, $1 million is worth $1 million, right? Then he writes, "So Should we factor this in? And if so, what is a reasonable method to adjust our FI number based on the percentage of pre versus post tax assets? If this is relevant, maybe it could be factored into the calculator. Looking forward to hearing from you. And then he says, FYI, still holding out for the audiobook, but I will purchase it the day it comes out. Now, that tells you how far behind I am in my emails, because the audiobook has, and I think Dan knows this, but has been out now for like a month and a half. So here's my view. If most of your retirement funds are in Roths, then you can think of it on an after-tax basis, right? In other words, if you need, let's make up a number. If you need $50,000 a year from your retirement accounts, then you would just take 50,000 times 25, and that's sort of a loose definition of financial income using the 4% rule. Hope everyone followed that. If everything is in a traditional 401k/IRA, and you need $50,000 on an after-tax basis, then you need to adjust that number, right? To figure out, okay, well, how much do I need to take out of a traditional retirement account in order to get $50,000 on an after-tax basis? And that's just going to depend on your state and federal income tax rates, right? And so you can just do the calculations. So if you do the calculations based on, at least today's tax brackets, you may say, okay, I'm just going to make up a number. I need 70,000. And based on state income tax and federal income tax, that should net me 50 grand. And so you take that 70,000, you multiply it by 25. That's a much bigger number, right? Than multiplying 50 by 25. And so that's how I think about it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. The calculator doesn't do any of that. I suppose you could add that feature in and have a data point for your tax bracket, although that gets... The problem with that is what number would you put in there? You wouldn't want to put in your marginal tax rate. You'd want to put in your effective tax rate. So the marginal tax rate is the tax rate you pay on your last dollar of taxable income. So in other words, the highest rate you pay. Your effective tax rate is taking all the taxes you paid and dividing it by all of your income, taxable income. And that number is always going to be lower than your marginal rate. I hope that makes sense. So anyway, Dan, that's how I think about it. I still think you could use a calculator either way. Now, some of you may be saying, well, Rob, wait a minute. I got a trick question here because I got a lot in Roth and I got a lot in traditional. Maybe it's 50-50 or it's 60-40. You got to take a swag. I mean, you could look at it and say, well, I need 50 grand. I'm going to take 25 out of a Roth and 25 out of a traditional. Well, out of the Roth, it's simple. I need 25. Out of the traditional, to net 25, I need, again, I'm just going to make up a number, I need 35. Well, there's your answer. 35 plus your 25 from your Roth is 60. Is that right? Yes, I think so. And then you can multiply that by 25. Again, the one thing I would caution, this whole 4% rule and 25 times expenses, I view it as a way to plan. It's a planning number. It's sort of we want a target. So this is my target. When you actually get to the point where you're going to seriously think about retiring, that's when you get a sharp pencil out and some paper and you really figure out what's my budget, how does that compare to my investments, and you really start to do some math. I probably would be very uncomfortable, particularly at a young age, retiring if I'll call it my 4% budget, right? Because that's what you would take out in your first year. If I needed every single penny of it just to survive. If I was cutting my budget to the bone and I just made it under that 4%. But boy, if the furnace goes out and I need a new furnace, I'm in trouble. I would not feel comfortable retiring. On the other hand, maybe you looked at your budget and said, well, 2.5% of that first year's withdrawal from my investments will go to necessities. And then 1.5% will go to discretionary spending, some travel, eating out, whatever. That gives you some cushion, right? If things start to fall apart, the market goes down, whatever, you may have to cut back some of your discretionary spending or go back to work part-time maybe, right? But you've got some flexibility. Another big factor is whether you have any debt or not. If you haven't, someone could, you could have two people say, yeah, I'm retiring and I can live off 4% of my income. One may say, like I mentioned, well, yeah, 2.5% is necessities, 1.5% is discretionary. Another person can say, well, not only is 4% all necessity, but some of that goes to debt payments because I got a lot of debt. Then I'm really nervous about doing it. So people will ask me, is the 4% rule, is it a good rule? Well, I think it's a reasonable rule, particularly when you're planning and setting a target. But you got to look beyond that rule to the specific circumstances you're confronted with to really answer the question, am I comfortable retiring now? The other thing to keep in mind, by the way, someone could say, you could have two people, again, 4% rule, I'm following it, I'm going to retire. We've mentioned how much is discretionary versus necessity. We've mentioned, do you have debt or not? That's a factor. But one person could say, you know what, I'm a software engineer. If I had to go back to work in 5 years, wouldn't be a problem. I could find work I love to do, could work from pretty much anywhere, I'd be fine. Another person could say, well, I've got a union job in a manufacturing plant, and it's the only job going in my town, and I really don't want to leave my hometown. I like it here. And yeah, it'd be kind of hard for me to get another job making that kind of money. I don't know what I'd do. See, they're totally different circumstances, even though they're both retiring using the 4% rule. That's why they put the word personal in personal finance.
Chase is a sponsor of the DR podcast, and all views and opinions expressed are ours alone. Let's pause briefly to mention our sponsor today, the Chase Freedom Unlimited. We spend a lot of time discussing credit cards on this podcast, and on DoorRoller.net, we believe the Chase Freedom Unlimited card is one of the best you can own. The Cashback Rewards program, the introductory offer, is just one of the reasons why we believe it's a credit card worth owning. For more information on the Chase Freedom Unlimited card or to apply, please visit creditcards.com/doorroller.
All right, I kind of got off topic there, Dan. Sorry about that. Hopefully I answered your question. Question number 4 from Kristen. I'm in the middle of reading your book, which led me to your podcast. I have just listened to the episode on investing in 529 plans and have a few questions. We will be moving to Arizona in June into a small hobbit house. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds like all kinds of fun. All right. They own it free and clear. We will sell our current primary residence. After we pay off the mortgage, we'll have some money. I'm going to leave it intentionally vague. With this windfall, I was thinking about putting a good chunk, maybe $45,000, into a 529 plan for my kids. My questions are, number 1, is there any benefit to super funding all 45 at once? How does one go about that? Any tips for choosing the best state 529 plan? Arizona's plan doesn't seem very appealing. I'm a Vanguard fan, and it would be nice to stay within Vanguard. And 3, what if none of my kids choose higher education? Are there penalties? Right. So these are all good questions. I did actually do some research on this one before I hit the record button on the podcast. Let me start with some of the easier ones. If you want to find a 529 that includes Vanguard funds, I am pretty sure, but let me just double check. I think good old Vanguard gives you some info. Yes. So if you Google Vanguard 529 plans, one of the search results is Vanguard. They have a page for it, and they used to have a nice link here to plans. Yes, they have use our interactive map tool to compare 529 plans and find the right one for you. If you click on that, there you go. Boom. So I guess you could Google Vanguard 529 plan interactive map and go right to it. But it has a map of the U.S. and it's color coded. And this is interesting. They have a certain color for 529 plans that offer Vanguard investments, management, and services. And I'm shocked. Oh, I see. What I was going to say is there's only 5 states. But I guess that's for Vanguard investments, management, and services. But then there are more states that have Vanguard investments. I'm just looking at the map. I'd say another 15 roughly. So there you go. And if you hover over each thing, you get pop-ups with whether there's a state tax deduction or not, and some information about the Vanguard investments. So there you go. That's what I would do in terms of finding one. Now back to the questions. If your kids don't go to school, so here's the deal. You can change the beneficiaries of a 529. And so if one kid doesn't go and another one does, subject to 529 limits, You can change the beneficiary and give the money, use the money for the other child. There's other rules for like trade schools and things like that. But at the end of the day, if you've got no one in your life that's gone to school, then and you take the money out for non-education, it gets taxed, and you get a 10% penalty. I believe that's the rule. Now, the interesting question, or more complicated question, is the superfunding question. So I started to Google this, and I immediately realized, so this is how I think about these issues. Part of figuring out personal finance is knowing when you don't know something, or knowing when there could be issues you're not even educated enough to articulate or identify that could bite you. Normally, my spidey sense is pretty good on this, mainly from dealing with it day in and day out as a lawyer. That always would. The tough legal questions didn't scare me. It was the legal questions I wasn't even smart enough to know I should be asking. That's what always scared me. It's what I don't know that I don't know. And my spidey senses started tingling as I researched this issue, because there's all kinds of tax issues here. There's, strictly speaking, no like annual contribution limit on a 529. There is an overall limit based on how much you would need to go to school, and there's numbers for that. It's a big number though. It's 6 figures. Then you have the case of, if you're getting a tax deduction, should you spread it out over a number of years in order to soak up as much of the tax deductions as you can get? Now in Arizona, I don't believe there is a tax deduction. And by the way, the handy Vanguard map will tell me, yep, oh wait, there is a state tax deduction, but no Vanguard options. So that's another thing to factor in. At least according to Vanguard, there is a state tax deduction in Arizona for 529 contributions. Now I don't know the details, but if you contributed all $45,000 in 1 year, I'm going to guess that the tax deduction is probably just for a few thousand, and I don't know if you can roll forward in future years. My guess is no. But this is the spidey sense telling me I'm not really sure about that. And I could have spent hours researching it, but I'll let you do that. But that's a question I'd be asking. And the other one has to do with gift taxes. So anyway, you can give gifts up to $15,000 a year per person. And there's sort of a lifetime exemption that I think is 11.4 million. It's a ridiculous number, but that changes. And so on this issue, I would talk to your tax person, right? You could call Arizona's 529 plan and see if they have someone that you have confidence enough in to talk to. But otherwise, this is an important enough issue. I would call my tax person. And I know you're listening to the show for me to have all the answers. I do have an answer today. It's call your tax person. That one just, it's the kind of issue where there could be tax implications lurking under the surface that I'm just not aware of. And so that's what I would do if I were confronted with that question. So yeah, that's my answer on that one. In any event, the Vanguard map, I can give you that answer with confidence. That's a pretty good tool. Okay, our fifth and final question of the day comes from Ryan. Very thankful for your podcast and how much it has shaped my financial thinking over just the last 45 days or so when I first got introduced to the Dough Roller podcast. I was traveling with a couple of friends in Europe at the end of September, and one of my friends pulled up your interview of Mr. Money Mustache. I think that's podcast 7, I think. Boy, that was like 6 years ago. Anyway, needless to say, that interview revolutionized my thinking on our drive from Switzerland to Barcelona. Boy, doesn't that just sound delightful? On our drive from Switzerland to Barcelona, we actually then listened to your audiobook, and I've since opened up an account at Vanguard and begun the process of investing. I opened a Roth and trying to manage money more wisely. I'm still fairly young, and I'm in my first full-time job as a youth pastor. I've also decided, too, that I'm going to work through your podcast sequentially, and I just finished the 30-Day Money Challenge that you taped back in January 2014. Oh, I remember it well. He says, my question for you is this. As part of my compensation package, my church will match up to 3% of my gross salary in a retirement account. However, even as a 501c3 charitable organization, it is kind of, quote unquote, on me to set up my account as there is no official church-sponsored plan. I started the aforementioned Roth and gave my information to our office administrator payroll person. However, She was mystified because the senior pastor, the only other pastor on staff, actually has a 403B. Something doesn't seem right to me, as there is no established 403B plan that I can join. The lack of a plan that I can join seems odd to me based on your discussions of how narrow 401k, 403b options can often be. Let me just kind of skip a little bit. He says, am I allowed to just go start a 403b somewhere on my own? The senior pastor had a financial advisor set up the 403b years ago. The pastor has much more of the mentality of let someone else manage his money and not think about it. I'd much prefer to manage investments myself. And then he said, I figured with your wife's work in the adoption agency and your exposure to 403bs, you may be able to help or point me to a resource that could help me. And then he goes on, but you get the gist of the question. So Ryan, unless there's something I don't know, and there's very well could be, you cannot go open a 403b or a 401k on your own as an employee, right? These are employer-sponsored plans. That's number one. Number two, if the senior pastor is contributing to a 403b, and I'm going to assume he's an employee of the church and that you are too, that 403b has to be available to you. He can't go open it up on his own and exclude all of the other employees. Now, there could be a time limit, right? There could be, I think the cap is a year, but I could be wrong about that. But companies can set it up so that, and in fact, now that I think about it, when I had a 401k on my business, this is how it worked, although it didn't really apply to anyone because I didn't have employees, but this is just how it was set up. You had to work a year before you qualified to contribute. So that's possible. Now, again, I don't know what the limits are on that. But beyond that, if he's contributing to a 403b, the church has to have one. So I guess my recommendation would be talk to the senior pastor and find out, right? Because, yeah, and I'm not aware of how an employer can contribute to your own personal IRA and treat that as a direct retirement contribution for tax purposes. Maybe it's possible. If it is, I've never heard of it. So I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you. Something is not right here. If he's contributing to a 403b, then you should have access to it as well. Now, it may be that he's not contributing to a 403b, but yeah, I would talk to the senior pastor. And also, even apart from the 403b question, if part of your package is 3% of your gross salary contributed to a retirement account, then I would ask the powers that be at the church, how do we make that happen, right? Rather than solving it yourself. I mean, I'd start with the 403b question, and then it would be, okay, well, if we don't have a 403b, how does this work? How do I get this benefit? Yeah. So I'm with you. That's a mystery to me as well. Not sure how they've worked that out. So, but best of luck with it, and would love to hear how it turned out. So shoot me an email if you feel like it, dr.dorwiller.net, and let me know. So 5 questions, 5 down, many more to go. And if you have questions, shoot me an email, dr.dorwiller.net. I'm really going to be focused on these questions over the next few shows. As I mentioned earlier, perhaps with a CFP by my side for one of them, just because I think it'd be cool to hear his thoughts on questions like these. So would love to hear from you. Shoot me an email. If you haven't joined the Facebook group, dorwiller.net/Facebook group. Would love to have you there as well. Hope you have a great day, a great week. Until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. And for those that didn't turn off the podcast, once you achieve financial freedom, then you start asking different questions. What do you do with it? And it's kind of an interesting question. It's the kind of question that if you're working and trying just to dig out of debt and you hear someone talk about financial freedom and say, I'm not quite sure what to do with it, you kind of want to just punch them in the nose. I get that. But I can't tell you how many FIRE folks I've talked to who either have reached financial independence or close. They're struggling with this question. it's almost as if, we've been focused so long on achieving something that it's really kind of defined, at least in part, who we are. And once you've achieved it, it's almost like you've lost a part of yourself. And it's not always easy to figure out what's going to fill that. And it's kind of like climbing the mountain. The climb is great. You get to the top, it's like, now what? Yeah, so I've been, to say I've been struggling with that question is probably a bit of an overstatement, but it's been on my mind. And exactly what you do with it. So for now, I'm just going to keep doing this podcast and doing my thing. But yeah, just thought I'd share that with you. Maybe it's worth a show down the road. Anyway, have a good one.